This video discusses the shooting of three African Americans in Jacksonville, Florida by a white young male named Ryan Palmiter on August 26, 2023, and the lessons African Americans and all nations can learn from it. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. On Saturday, August 26, 2023, a 21-year-old white gunman named Ryan Palmiter shot and killed three black people at a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida. The victims were identified as Angela Michelle Carr, 52, A.J. Laguerre, 19, and Gerald Gallion, 29. Authorities said the shooting was racially motivated based on the dark manifestos the shooter left on his computer. Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters, an African American himself, said during a press conference that he hated black people. Swastikas were painted in white on one of the guns the suspect was carrying, clearly pointing to the fact that he was a German masquerader. So, what are the lessons African Americans and nations can learn from this shooting? There is a great deal of propaganda of hate being directed at white people, particularly former colonizers such as Britain, and those who enslaved others, such as white Americans. It's easy to do as no people like to be ruled by others and hold a grudge against those who rule them. That's why it's easy to direct hatred against the American and British people. This propaganda against colonialism and slavery is not of recent origin. It started soon after 1918 when the First World War ended, but remained hidden till about 2000. After the First World War, Germany was stripped of its colonies. They then targeted the British and colonialism in general to direct hatred against colonization and have Britain and France stripped of their colonies. Hatred against Americans for slavery was directed soon after World War II, and the source remained hidden till about 2000. That's when the existence of German masqueraders, who are people of German ancestry living in white countries, was fully discovered. Now the source of the propaganda is no longer hidden. It is the German and German masqueraders around the world. Also, please note that the propaganda is directed against the British and American people, not against the Brazilians who also owned slaves, or against the Portuguese, or against the Spanish who were colonizers. Now, Merriam-Webster dictionary defines propaganda as the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution, a cause, or a person, or ideas, facts, or allegations spread deliberately to further one's cause or to damage an opposing cause. That is precisely what German and German masqueraders engage in. They will use any lies, rumor, innuendo, false allegations, distortion of the truth, or any information, true or false, that will help pull down and hurt their enemies. They consider the American, British, and Jewish people to be their number one enemies. The American and the British are enemies number one because they defeated the Germans in two world wars. Moreover, as descendants of Joseph, they are holders of the birthright promise, which it's as stated in Genesis 49 verses 22 to 26 and 1 Chronicles 5 verse 2, which states, "For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler, but the birthright was Joseph." The birthright means the promise of material blessings above all nations of the world. That incites German envy. Now, hatred against the Jews is Satan inspired. God gave the right to the scepter or kingship to Judah, as stated in Genesis 49, verse 10, which states, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh," meaning Jesus Christ, come. Ancestors of the Jews. So, so the king or kingship should not depart from Judah, meaning the ancestors of the Jews. Thus, kingship among the descendants of the tribes of Israel was to be with the Jews. But when God promises something to someone, he usually delivers much more than he promised. The Jews are spread around all over the world and mixed with the local people. Many have risen to the position of kingship. Thus, though God promised kingship to Judah over only one tribe of Israel, which is fulfilled in British royalty and all other royalty in Northwestern democracies, he has fulfilled his promise by helping Jews rise to kingship or rulership in many countries. Even in God's kingdom, the top king of kings will be Jesus Christ, a Jew, and many kings in top positions around the world will be Jews, made immortal as sons of God at the resurrection when Jesus Christ returns. God's kingdom will remove Satan and the demons from rulership of the world at that time. That is why hatred against the Jews is Satan inspired. Why did propaganda against colonialism start immediately after World War I? Because after that war, Germany was stripped of all its colonies. Since then, they have maligned the British people for their history of colonialism and worked to deprive them of their colonies, though they have not targeted the Portuguese or the Spanish for that purpose. But colonization was part of God's promise to the patriarch Joseph, the ancestor of the British and American people, as stated in Genesis 49, verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The phrase whose branches run over the wall means that they will spread out from their natural boundaries, meaning that they would be a colonizing people, with the purpose being that they could bring knowledge of the true God from the Bible to the colonies. I too come from a country, India, that was a British colony. But I don't hate the British for ruling over us, because I know that it was God's purpose to introduce me to Christianity and the Bible so that I could be warned of the coming catastrophes and act as God requires of me to receive his help to survive these catastrophes. Moreover, the English language gave us easy access to modern science, medical knowledge, and other literature, bringing us into the 20th century. Now, why are Americans being maligned for slavery and African Americans are asking for reparations? Consider the fact that German masqueraders in the United States came among the earliest European settlers and continued coming through the decades and centuries. They too were among slave owners, proven by the fact that they fought the American Civil War to preserve the institution of slavery, while those of genuine British descent recognized it as an abominable institution and wanted to end it. Segregation and Jim Crow laws were the handiwork of German masqueraders in the South, whereas even Martin Luther King Jr. recognized that the North was not as segregated and African Americans had a lot more opportunities there. But the situation changed dramatically immediately after World War II. Why? Consider the fact that starting with President Truman in 1945 till end of Nixon's presidency on August 9, 1974, except for 2 years and 10 months of John F. Kennedy's presidency, all other presidents were German masqueraders. Their goal was to hold the presidency in perpetuity. For that purpose, they needed as much of the non-white population allied with them as possible, and they needed them to murder as many white people of non-German ancestry as possible. They also needed them to mix the whites of non-German ancestry with non-white races. And since early 1960s, they had the technology to deliver threats electronically directly into the ears of people to force them to do almost anything they wanted. With threats, they were able to control the most successful businesses and the economy so that they could reward murderers. To encourage non-whites to murder whites of non-German ancestry, they needed to generate hatred between the races. And that's why German masqueraders initiated all the propaganda against slavery and colonialism. Now you have the answer to who is really behind all the propaganda against slavery in America and against the British for colonization and clamor for reparations. They must continually generate propaganda and hatred against America, Britcom nations, and Israel to keep all their alliance partners firmly in their camp. What is the ultimate German goal? Words in the Nazi national anthem Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in der Welt, meaning Germany, Germany above all else in the world. That anthem says it all. Thus, German belief is as old as their ancient ancestor. This German belief is as old as their ancient ancestor Asher, the grandson of Noah, soon after the flood. His descendants, the Assyrians, were the first to build an empire, first in collaboration with Nimrod, and after his death on their own. They conquered and ruled with the utmost brutality and cruelty. They have been trying ever since to conquer and rule the world. The Germans know that they can't conquer the world on their own. They tried in the two world wars. Each time their smaller population as compared to the enemies prevented them from being victorious. But this time around they have the world's two most populous nations, China and India, as allies, among others in the Muslim world. The goal of the German masqueraders obviously is also to win the civil war in our countries, while Germany, China, and their allies fight our countries on the outside. They do not constitute a majority of the white population in our countries. To get the numbers in their favor, they first controlled the immigration process and allowed in only those white and other people who would be allied with them, mostly by asking them to meet their hurdle qualification of murdering a white person of British descent in their countries, or others the Germans view as enemies, such as the Sikhs and Punjabis. They controlled the economy with threats so that they were able to reward such immigrants as well as murderers among the minorities already in our countries, such as African Americans and Hispanics. I hope now African Americans and other minorities in our countries can understand the motive of the German masqueraders to befriend them. They are not your friends, as demonstrated by their fighting the Civil War to keep the institution of slavery intact and the segregation they practiced after that with Jim Crow and other laws all the way till the early 1960s. They were not your friends or allies then, and they are not your friends or allies now. Their only motive is to use you for their own purposes to help them win the coming civil war. They have perfected the art of divide and rule. They target an enemy, in this case people of British descent or whites of non-German descent. Then they use sustained virulent propaganda, falsehood and deception to make that target hated by everyone. That target then becomes the common enemy of everyone else. Then it is ugly human nature to feel a sort of kinship with all those who who hate the common enemy. That's how African Americans and other minorities feel the German masqueraders as their good friends, whereas other whites of non-German ancestry are their enemies. But now let's come back to Jacksonville killer Ryan Palmiter. He does not leave any doubt in anyone's mind that he is a German masquerader because of the swastikas he had painted on one of his guns. There are other killers who have specifically targeted African Americans. Examples are the June 15, 2015 Charleston, South Carolina shooting by Dylan Roof at the Emmanuel African Baptist Episcopal Church, in which 9 African Americans were killed, and the May 14, 2022 Buffalo, New York shooting at the Tops Friendly Market, in which African Americans were gunned down by Peyton S. Gendron. Other mass shootings include the February 14, 2018 shooting by 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz on students and staff at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in the Miami suburban town of Parkland, Florida, United States, killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. And then the August 5, 2012 shooting at Oak Creek, Wisconsin, Sikh temple by a 40-year-old Wade Michael Page, a member of white power and neo-Nazi groups, in which 6 people of Sikh faith were killed and 4 others wounded. One victim who died later, and the April 20, 1999 shooting by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, killing 12 students and one teacher at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, before committing suicide. The common feature in all these and many other mass shootings is that the shooters belonged to neo-Nazi groups or had similar beliefs, meaning they were German masqueraders. Then there are many shootings at Jewish synagogues by German masqueraders. African Americans, the German masqueraders, are not your friends as they make themselves out to be. They people would not be targeting to kill you and openly expressing their hate for you in their manifestos. They are feigning friendship just to use you by inveigling you into fighting battles on their behalf, by putting your lives on the line to help them win the coming civil war. That is true of the Germans and German masqueraders everywhere in the world. When they profess friendship, they are lying to you. God has succinctly described their nature in prophecy in Nahum 3 verse 1. Woe to the city! And God is using Nineveh, the ancient capital of Assyria, to represent the Germans. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. Yes, they are full of blood. That's why almost all the random mass shootings are by German masqueraders, unless some settled family or workplace grudges by merely shooting. They are full of lies when they profess friendship. Their goal is plunder, and they've been mighty successful at it since the end of World War II, and they're always victimizing some people or the other. Now, why do the Germans behave this way? It is because Satan has deceived them into believing that they only have the divine spark in them, meaning they only have the potential to have eternal life, or that destiny in heaven is only for Germans. The rest of humanity, including all other whites, are like animals and cattle with no future for eternal life. When their life ends, that's the end of their story, like any cat, dog, cow, or mosquito. Just as animals were created to serve humans, the rest of humanity was created to serve the Germans. Now, this deception is nothing new. The lie is as old as the Garden of Eden, when Satan told it to Eve, and that she shall surely not die, meaning that she had an immortal soul. Some of those before Noah's flood, the world-famous family of Lamech and his children, mentioned in Genesis 4, verses 18 to 24, whom the modern world knows as the gods and goddesses Zeus, Hera, Demeter, Apollo, Hercules, Vulcan, and Athena, who were all Satan worshippers, just like the Germans. God dealt with all those who thought they were the divine ones and forced the rest of humanity to worship them by drowning them alive in the flood. God is going to deal with the Germans in similar ways by being brutally dealt with by the kings of the East. Their two leaders, known as the King of the North in Daniel 11:40-44 and Revelation 13:1, and the false prophet, by throwing them alive in a burning fire as trash to be burned to death. That fate is prophesied in Revelation 19 verse 20, which states, "And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that received the mark of the beast, and them that worship his image. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the ones who will throw them alive into the fire will be their former American, British, and Jewish slaves, rescued by Jesus Christ, as stated in Obadiah 1 verses 16 to 18. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reward shall return upon your own head, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame." I hope this message acts as sufficient warning to all nations and African Americans who want to deal with the Germans and believe they are your friends. I hope you recognize their true nature and understand their false beliefs. Don't fall for their propaganda of hate against white people of non German descent, particularly those of British descent. Remember, all human beings, including the Germans, are created equal in God's image with the ultimate potential to be born into God's family as his literal sons and daughters. That is what salvation is, a future potential far greater than what Satan has deceived the Germans into believing. The only path to achieving that goal is through Jesus Christ by accepting his sacrifice as payment of the death penalty for forgiveness of our sins, and then turning our lives around by obeying God's commandments as detailed in the Bible. That's also the only way to receive God's help in coming out alive through the global catastrophes that the Germans will plunge the world into by starting the Third World War. The good news is that tens of millions or perhaps hundreds of millions will receive God's help in surviving the catastrophes, as mentioned in Revelation 7 and verse 14. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds, meaning ethnic groups, and people, and tongues, meaning languages, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, which is another name for Jesus Christ, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God which sits upon the throne and unto the Lamb. These are they which came out of the great tribulation, and I washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. The decision to obey God or continue to remain on the side of the Germans and Satan by swallowing their false propaganda is entirely yours. Now, thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini to view and get information on the latest videos.